Hey guys, I wanted to quickly run through 13 potential vice presidential picks that we could see from Joe Biden and his team, and I'd love to hear your guys' comments on perhaps individuals that I'm not considering at this point in time that you think would be great VP picks, or just who in general you think Joe Biden and his team will end up choosing as a running mate. So starting off here, we have Kamala Harris. She recently endorsed the former vice president, and she does a good job in terms of diversifying the ticket, and she also occupies a similar lane to Joe Biden politically. The downside to Harris is she didn't have a ton of success in her presidential campaign, but beyond that, she's from California, which we know is a state that the Democrats are going to be able to pick up come the general election, so she doesn't necessarily strategically expand the map or come from a state that would be critical for winning the Electoral College. Moving over to Amy Klobuchar, of course, the senator from Minnesota, and her, just like Kamala Harris, expanded their name recognition quite a bit through their presidential bids, and Klobuchar stuck it out quite a bit longer than some of these other individuals that many thought would have more success than her throughout this process. She's from the Midwest. She makes that abundantly clear pretty much every time we hear her talk. The state of Minnesota was actually really competitive between Clinton and Trump back in 2016, so that's a state that you might want to shore up a bit. But Minnesota tends to be a bit more to the left than some of these other Midwestern states that are probably a bit more strategic in nature, and some individuals coming from those other states that I'm going to be touching on here as I move through this list. Also, she was early on to endorse Biden after she stepped out of the race, a big difference maker potentially for the former vice president when heading into Super Tuesday, was able to garner that Klobuchar endorsement. And then moving over to Stacey Abrams, an up-and-comer, of course, in the Democratic ranks. She had a really strong run for the governorship in the state of Georgia in 2018, and she diversifies the ticket and perhaps expands the map to a state like Georgia, which can be relatively competitive, but certainly you give the statewide lean consistently over to the Republicans. But if you can get an increase in voter turnout, then Georgia is one of those southeastern states, kind of like Florida, where it can become very competitive. It's a step to the right of the state of Florida, but out of all of the other southeastern states, one that can actually be competitive statewide. So that's another choice that could possibly be on the Biden team's target list. So then moving on to Elizabeth Warren, the fact that she hasn't endorsed Biden up to this point in time reduces her chances of being that pick. She could possibly be kind of an olive branch to the progressive wing of the party. However, there's a large faction of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party that now doesn't like Elizabeth Warren as much because she's sitting on the sidelines again in 2020, just like she did back in 2016, and not endorsing Bernie Sanders. And then also just a number of other things that Warren has done throughout this process, which has alienated a bit more of that progressive wing of the party. So not necessarily uniting the two factions of the party, but if you did pick Elizabeth Warren, it would strengthen probably the white suburban women vote, which has been an expanding electorate among the Democrats. Certainly we saw that back in the 2018 midterm. So someone to keep in mind, but probably a little bit lower on the list than the first three individuals that I touched on. Moving to another individual that would diversify the ticket, you have Val Demings. She's a congresswoman from Florida, so perhaps you can maybe put Florida as a bit more competitive if you pick somebody like a Demings, but she doesn't have overwhelming name recognition by any means, and that potentially hurts the appeal of picking someone from a battleground state who isn't super well known, as opposed to, somebody who's won a statewide race, for instance, this being a congresswoman from the state of Florida, but someone to certainly keep in mind. Moving over to the senator from the state of Illinois, and a Midwestern pick and somebody to diversify the ticket. You have somebody with ties to the military, but the fact that Illinois is a pretty safe state in general for the Democrats to win presidentially probably doesn't help in terms of that strategic nature of the pick. So someone to keep in mind, but perhaps not quite as strategic as some of these later on picks that I have here as VP options. So moving over to Gretchen Whitmer, this would be a pick to try to win the state of Michigan. She is the governor currently of the state. She did a really good job in the 2018 governor election, winning by double digits. She's endorsed Joe Biden. I think she is probably being overlooked to some extent as a really strong possibility as being that VP pick. She occupies a similar lane politically to Joe Biden, very establishment-oriented politician. And again, winning Michigan, extremely crucial for the Democrats. So Whitmer is someone to keep on your radar. Tammy Baldwin, another very strategic pick, the senator from the state of Wisconsin. I think she's a bit less likely than some of these other individuals because she's quite a bit more progressive. She's a Medicare for All Democrat in the Senate, which isn't as common as the ones who are not for Medicare for All. And like I said, pretty progressive in nature means that Biden and his team probably will look elsewhere, but I would say this is probably the most strategic pick, in my opinion, because Wisconsin is probably the most important state for the Democrats to win if they're going to pick up an electoral college victory. They don't have to win the state of Wisconsin, but it definitely makes things much easier if they do that, and Baldwin had tremendous success in winning her re-election bid in 2018. She's very popular in the state of Wisconsin, and I think if you pick her as a VP, it unifies a bit more so the factions of the Democratic Party, picking someone who's a bit more progressive. This is something the Democrats did a terrible job with back in 2016, where they had Hillary Clinton on the top of the ticket, and then she picked someone that was even a bit to her right with Tim Kaine. I think that was a disastrous pick. And even though they won the battle of picking up the state of Virginia, they lost the war in terms of grabbing a larger swath of the electorate and ended up losing that election, of course, to Donald Trump. I think Baldwin is just an extremely smart, strategic pick, but I'm skeptical that Joe Biden and his team would be looking in that direction. And then moving on to the next two options would potentially help pick up the state of Texas, starting off with Julian Castro. I think he's less likely than the next pick that I have coming up, given the fact that he didn't end up endorsing Biden right away. Of course, he worked for Elizabeth Warren's campaign. And also, Julian Castro, he hasn't shown statewide electoral success in Texas like the next pick here, Beto O'Rourke, did in 2018 in that very competitive Senate race against Ted Cruz. Also, Beto O'Rourke came out and endorsed Joe Biden, and I think he could potentially be on a short list of VP picks. However, I think they're going to want to diversify the ticket with picking a female, but if they did go in the white male direction, Beto O'Rourke would be extremely strategic in nature in trying to expand the map and pick up Texas. And then I threw Michelle Obama in here. Probably unlikely. I don't think she necessarily has VP aspirations at this point in her life, but it would be kind of interesting to have a Biden-Obama ticket as opposed to the Obama-Biden ticket that we had for two successful election cycles in 2008 and 2012. And perhaps I'm undervaluing the political aspirations of Michelle Obama longer term. Someone that is very popular and would diversify the ticket, and would probably be a slam dunk for the Democrats if they could get her to run as VP, with getting more excitement and enthusiasm, particularly among the African-American base and voters beyond just what you're getting from Joe Biden. So then also Andrew Yang, he's been a bit closer with Joe Biden throughout the process after he stepped out of the race than he has been with some of the other individuals that were running for the presidential nomination. And we got kind of that pseudo endorsement from Yang of Biden recently with his coverage on CNN. I don't think he strategically expands the map from being from a key battleground state, but if you're going for picking somebody who's kind of viewed more as a political outsider, kind of like what Trump was running on in 2016, maybe it's not a terrible idea to pick somebody like that in 2020 as your running mate, as not being part of entrenched U.S. politics could be an interesting strategy to go with. And then moving on to the last individual that I have here is Sherrod Brown, another very strategic pick in terms of trying to pick up a battleground state like Ohio. Ohio's been a state that's been trending more so towards the Republicans in recent election cycles, but Sherrod Brown had success winning his re-election bid recently in 2018, and he could possibly make the Democrats very competitive in Ohio in 2020. The downside is he doesn't diversify the ticket, and that might be viewed as more of a negative, so he's probably a bit longer of a shot than some of these other individuals that I touched on. But those are the 13 potential vice presidential picks. And again, if you think I've missed anybody that you think could be a serious contender for that VP pick, I'd love to hear your comments down in the comment section below, as well as who you think Biden might pick at the end of the day to be his running mate. So I appreciate you guys stopping by. Consider subscribing for more election coverage, and I hope to see you back here for my next video.